Hello, and welcome to the Sacred Heart Shaman podcast, where we talk about spiritual healing, shamanic wisdom, and the challenges of walking the healer's path. My name is Nadia Harenkiu, and today is episode number 10. We will be talking about the difference between big pleasure and little pleasure. I love the idea of knowing that people that I've never met before are listening to this podcast. It is bringing me so much joy. So thank you. If you are not a current client or friend, I'm glad that you're here. I want to start off first by saying that this episode does have some more explicit content, not in the way of sharing, I'm sorry, sharing, swearing, not in the way of swearing, but in the way of sensitive and deep topics that may not be suitable for younger ears, such as sexuality and masturbation. Um, the topic today is a pretty interesting one and one that's been coming up super loud for me personally over the last month or two. And that is the difference between big pleasure and little pleasure. So, that being said, we are going to dive in. I will tell you that being on the spiritual path, which means you have been awakened to the reality of things, you are on a spiritual path. Once you know, understand, accept that the reality around us is not real in the same way that we once thought that it was. Um, on this path, the further you go, the more deeply you go, the more your tastes for pleasure change, right? So, a lot of people who start down this path may quit smoking, they may quit drinking, their diet may change, the way that they treat their body, the way that they interact with other people, relationships, their job. Everything about our life changes because I believe we're no longer seeking small pleasure. We're no longer feeling pleasure by the things that bring us small pleasure. And those things fade away or drop off as they need to. For me, smoking cigarettes dropped off almost immediately many years ago, and then it would come back around in certain periods of my life or when I needed certain things. And now I understand through working with tobacco in a sacred way that there is a reason for that. And smoking cigarettes is no longer a thing for me, but my taste literally changed around it. Like it was no longer satisfying. It no longer felt like it was filling space in my lungs. I did not derive pleasure from it. And so it changed and it kind of exited my life. Um, Now, the same thing could not be said about drinking. That one took a bit longer. I felt a strong connection with alcohol. It was very ancestral, it was very shadowy, very productive in a lot of ways. And I am a shadow worker, right? I work a lot with demons and helping people do their own shadow work. And so that makes sense to me. And at this point, that has also dropped off in the same way that it was occupying space in my life. Um, because my taste for it has changed. My vibration has changed in such a way that that substance or spirit or experience no longer resonates with me. Now, the new one that's coming up, which is super, super tender and vulnerable to talk about, is sexuality. And kind of diving into the intricacies of simple pleasure through sex and orgasm and physical experience with another person. And as I've been going down this path with regard to sexual pleasure, it's become somehow more clear to me the difference between little pleasure and big pleasure. So when I say little pleasure and big pleasure, I mean that wonderful feeling when you eat something delicious. That wonderful feeling of an orgasm. One of those pretty localized, wonderful, but doesn't travel to the edge of your fingertips and toes kind of orgasm. Those are small pleasures. So, small pleasures can be with food, alcohol, smoking, sexual activity. And this comes from a place of superficial pleasure. You're getting that hit right now to make you feel better in the moment. And it also takes away from the big pleasure or the long term pleasure. So I'm going to break this down. Um, we talk about, let's use food because it's so easy and so common. If I am using food to make me feel better in the moment, to bring me comfort, to help my anxiety, to distract me, to make me feel full, like you name it, the list goes on forever. Um, in doing that, I am avoiding some emotion that I'm having trouble looking at or I'm having trouble processing. And instead, I'm reaching for this simple pleasure, this superficial pleasure. Um, it can also be called like bypassing or buffering or emotional eating. So I'm taking that simple pleasure in exchange for the emotion. And, that's fine. It has worked for me for 37 years, 38 years now. And by avoiding those emotions that are coming up that are causing me to reach for food, I'm not processing them. And you know what's underneath those emotions? It's gifts, it's expansion, it's direction to a bigger pleasurable ticket, a bigger pleasure item. Now, I hate to admit to myself that I want to be super skinny. I want to look a certain way. I was told that, like, it's genetic and you can never be that small and it's just not possible. And look at how many times you've failed. All of the stories, right? But recently, I am starting to feel like nothing is impossible, that the only thing that's impossible is what we think is impossible. And so we create our own limitations. And as my belief around this genuinely shifts into a space where I believe anything is possible, I can say, holy shit, that's possible. I can be whatever size I want to be, and I can be happy there, and I can get there in an easy way, despite my 10 years of failing in diets or whatever, the things that have showed me that that's not possible. And so this belief has changed. And I have enlisted the help of a coach and also some resources from a coach that I've been following for many years on losing weight and like throwing out all the things that I've been doing and straight up going the calorie deficit route. And so, what I chose to work with in this case is an urge jar where every time I plan my meals out in advance and every time I want to deviate or I don't feel like eating what I planned out, I spend 10 minutes with that urge and I feel it fully. And then I put something in the urge jar. And I've already promised myself I'm going to do something amazing when the jar gets full. There's a whole reward system set up. But it's the fact that, truly, it's the fact that I'm finally ready to do this work. It's not about the diets, it's not about working out. It's about the fact that I have issues with emotional eating, and eating helps me get small pleasure. So, you can call that like a brain imbalance or an addictive personality. I don't believe in any of those labels. I believe that this is what it is until it's not. There's no need to label it. Um, Anyway, so I have this urge jar experience and I'm finally ready to be in this place. And as I move through these urges, I'm realizing that they are so simple, so basic, these emotions that are coming up. And the first time I sat with one, I sat with it for the full 10 minutes and I felt amazing when I was done sitting with it. And the second one was slightly less time, and so on and so forth until those urges didn't come up anymore. And as I allowed them to come up and to blossom, what I realized under all of those emotions were just these thoughts that were old, that were just running in the background, that are not serving me anymore. But I literally couldn't work on them because I couldn't see them. They were covered up with this emotion, which I then covered up with food. Okay, so as I'm going through this process of identifying my simple, superficial pleasure, my small pleasures, I'm realizing that I have these desires inside me that I have been stuffing down that are such big pleasures. I couldn't have even imagined that they were possible. And so by putting aside the little pleasures, the eating, which makes me feel better in the moment. I'm identifying these bigger pleasures. How much pleasure I have when my body is smaller and I get to dress it however I want because clothes are easier to find when you're skinny. Like, let's face it, they're better quality. You have more options. Everything looks good on you. And I love dressing myself up. That makes me feel good on a soul level to go out into the world, to wear clothes that look like they're put together, that don't look like they've been washed a million times. All the things that we struggle with as plus size women, finding decent clothes that fit decently and last more than 2 washes in the machine. That is something that brings me such great deep pleasure, but I can't have it until I'm ready to put down the little pleasure, the small pleasures, which is the food. And so this is just one example, right? I'm going to go through a couple examples because this is how they've been showing up in my life. And I think we learn through storytelling. So, on a personal level, that is what happened with food. And food has been the latest thing for me. Before that was smoking. When I gave up smoking, I realized that smoking was feeding my anxiety. And I always thought, I'm going to go smoke a cigarette because it helps my anxiety. So ridiculous because it actually doesn't. It doesn't help my anxiety at all. It makes it worse and it feeds it. And then when I was finally ready to stop smoking and I like stuck to it and I got the gum and I was like, this is the thing. And the way that that came about actually wasn't even because I firmly decided. It was because there were spirits who interfered so loudly that if I ignored it, I knew I was going to die from smoking. That's a story for another day. But when the spirits get involved on that level, you have to listen. Anyway, I stopped smoking. And then I realized that that space that I was filling inside me with the smoke was waiting for Nadia life force energy to come in. And now that she's filling that space, I have energy out the ass. I have more energy than I know what to do with. I have so much creativity, so much emotional clarity. I can't even keep it contained. Like I am recording podcasts weeks in advance. I just built a new website. I'm planning several international retreats for 2025. I can't even keep it under control because there's so much energy coursing through me that I was taking up space with tobacco, space inside me. So that was really cool, right? Talk about big pleasure versus little pleasure. The little pleasure of smoking a cigarette, which lasts honestly only for the first minute you're smoking, and then you're like, oh, this is gross. Oh, this hurts my lungs. All the things that come with smoking cigarettes. Put aside the little pleasure, deal with whatever emotions or circumstances or soul level stuff that you're not dealing with by using that substance. And then the big pleasure comes in. So I feel more like myself than ever before. I have the energy to do all the things. I'm showing up in the world as myself fully. It's been amazing. So cool. The next one is alcohol, which also is a life force energy thing. So I went from years and years ago, I was a daily drinker, like functional alcoholic. I remember 14, 15 years ago, I put alcohol in my smoothies in the morning. It was bad. I did my whole bachelor's degree on a bar stool. I did graduate at the top of my class, which was amazing and really sad. Really sad. So alcohol has been a big part of my life. And then, more recently, it's been sticking to like social events and networking and only when I'm out with other people. And that's fine because that spirit enjoys being in that setting. And then it just kind of fell out of my life. Like I no longer felt like I needed to go have a beer in order to get something done. And that was really interesting because there was like a crutch thing happening. Like I'd have the beer, I'd get the little hit in my brain, I would do the things, and then I would accredit that success to the beer. I did this because the beer let me, the beer support me, or the beer opened me up enough. Um, and that's some bullshit because I deserve the credit for doing the hard things. That one fell off more organically. And now that I'm no longer drinking, I have again so much energy. I did not even realize how much it was affecting my emotional state, my mental health, my sleep. Even if I wasn't drinking for days at a time, which has been the case for a long time, it was still affecting my sleep for 4 or 5 days afterwards. So that little pleasure of having a beer, being slightly buzzed, now that it is out of my life, the big pleasure of the big buzz. The holy cow, look what I just accomplished. Holy cow, what am I building right now? Like, and more self energy has space to come forward because I'm not capping myself. I'm not putting a depressant on top of me just to get things done. It's more like, yeah, I got this done. Now I got a free extra 45 minutes. Let's get something else done. There's just so much more energy and then more output. So as I'm going through these different phases, I'm starting to see like, okay, there are much bigger things in life to bring you like ridiculous amounts of pleasure, like soul level pleasure. And here we are settling for all of this little pleasure. Like, what else is there? And, just asking that question, of course, has brought up a whole different topic about pleasure. So until recently, I don't think I've been able to accept what it is that I actually want to do with my life. There's been a lot of like doubt and disbelief, and that's too much, that's too big. And I truly think that we can't push things until they're ready to pop, but we can take a different approach to the healing. We can take that approach of healing from the forward or healing from the future rather than healing from the past. And that's a shift that I'm making in my work with my clients right now as well. And it's been really fruitful. So, anyway, we have all these like standard small pleasure things. And now sex is coming up. So, I, got divorced earlier this year, not that long ago, have not been sexually active for quite some time, and have been working with a Tantra coach for probably about 2 years. Also worked with an intimacy coach. And, it's just kind of been something in the background. I worked with them for healing sexual trauma. And as I get further down this path of authenticity in myself, away from the marriage that I was in, my heart is opening in ways I didn't know was possible. My level of depth of love and of intimacy is like a mind blower. It's a total mind blower. And I don't know if you've ever worked with Tantra. The woman I work with is great. There's a lot of really bad and really sketchy and predatory people out there who call themselves tantric practitioners. So you have to be really careful. I love the Tantra studio with Maria in Beaverton. She's amazing. Um, Anyway, so I had been working with her, and as I work with tantric energy, which is self energy, it's love energy, it's moving the energy through my body, I am understanding that the pleasure point of having an open and connected heart, of having full intimacy and vulnerability is like pleasure to your bones. It's ecstatic, it's big, it's all encompassing. And even when I try to move into sexual energy, my body is like, Nadia, those are peanuts. What are you doing? We don't do that anymore. So even the way that I've approached that aspect of my life, and I haven't even put it into action yet because I've been single, um, but just changing, like having a shift in, I'm doing this for the orgasm. I'm doing this for the physical pleasure. Here's the physical pleasure. That was nice, rather than this like full deep, all encompassing, like pleasure, soul pleasure, intimacy, love. I thought that I had loved before. Nothing, nothing compares to what I've been feeling over these last 6 or 7 months. It is almost like a different paradigm. How on earth could I have ever accepted anything less in the sexual realm than what I'm cultivating just within myself? Like, imagine what happens when my divine partner shows up and he's ready to go. I can't even, like, I don't know that I'm even going to leave the house for like the first couple months because the pleasure that I am seeking is no longer small. It's big. It is earth-shattering levels of big. And I did not think that that was going to move into sex life, sex energy. Was not expecting that at all. So, like, the other side of that too is the deeper love. As far as I can remember, probably, yeah, into my early 20s, so like 15 years or so, I have had this longing for love that I don't know what to do with. And I brushed up against it once with someone, and I honestly compared everything else in my life to that experience. It was really hard to not pursue and embrace that, but it was not the right time. And, we can have the soulmate twin flame conversation at a different time, but I feel like there is a deeper level of love that I have always longed for. And yes, some of that is in myself, and I have been cultivating that, and it's been amazing. Had no idea I could love myself being in a fat body and also wanting to improve myself at the same time. So self-love is great, and it's also a separate topic. Like, we can also long for partnership. We can long for love in the romantic sense, and I have been in that space of longing for a long time. And most recently, on a spiritual level, I have experienced having a incoming partnership, and the level of love that exists there is like the kind of stuff that you think is not real, it's totally real. And I'm totally going to set an example with it. I can't wait. But I can honestly say that before this point in my life, I was too afraid to even consider, to even hope that that kind of love was possible. I wouldn't have been able to accept it. I wouldn't have been able to recognize it, to see it, to receive it. It just would have been literally impossible. But now it isn't. And so I've settled for small love. I've settled for toxic love and unhealthy dynamic and childhood trauma response and karmic love. Small love versus big love. So I think that's all I have to say about big pleasure and little pleasure, and to really assess where you're spending your little pleasure, where you're spending your energy, where if you peeled back the mask, if you peeled back the layers a little bit, what would it reveal about the bigger pleasures that are looking to come into your life? What are you not allowing yourself to want, to have, to dream of? Because it is completely available to you if you do the work. Anything is available to you if you do the work. And sometimes we do the work and we realize that that wasn't even the thing we wanted. The real thing is actually so much better. We just couldn't even see it at the time. So I hope my stories about pleasure were pleasurable. I appreciate you listening in today, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. If you enjoyed this podcast and want to know more about me and my work, you can find me at www.sacredheartshaman.com.